Hi, I'm Peter from Coffee Parts, and today we're looking at the Eureka Specialita versus the Baratza Sette 270s. So the Eureka Specialita and the Baratza 270s are in a similar price point. Yet on paper they're quite a different spec. What we're going to do is grind out some coffee on the Eureka, grind out some coffee on the Baratza, look at the workflow, talk about the specs, and see which machine's appropriate for you in your environment. So with Eureka grinder, it's a 55mm flat blade coffee grinder, grinding based on time. And you got two different time settings, your single and your double, or if you click both, you grind on demand based on the micro switch activation. So if we do go to a double and just grind it out, we'll just see its speed and how loud it is. You can see as the grinder goes, it is quite quiet, the grinder, and the coffee is very well evenly distributed and quite fluffy. It is quite nice. Settling it down, there is a niceness about it, and the build quality of the machine really is on point. Moving over to the Baratza, they're 40mm conical blade with the machines manufactured in Taiwan. And depending if you got the 270 or the 270 WI, they grind either based on time or based on weight. And they're the same grinder, it's just how they grind it changes, the workflow, weight versus time. So using the grind by time, we've got it set here. You got three settings, so three different times, 1, 2, or 3. One thing to note about these grinders is they are quite loud, but they work really fast with minimal mess and retention. Let's grind out some coffee and see it in action. Once again, it is a hands-free operation, which you lock in your portafilter and grind away. So in this case, we're going to grind 6.75 seconds and hit play. Although quite loud, the grinder really is fast, a lot faster than Eureka. And once again, very evenly distributed and very little mess. Because it grinds, basically what they've done is it's the external of the conical blade rotating. Coffee goes in from the top, straight through and into the portafilter. So it really is neat. You're not getting a lot of mess around. Like sometimes you get a little bit more on the Eureka. Another thing to note is it easily moves between espresso and filter coffee. So currently we've got the portafilter support set for espresso. But we could just move that to the side, push that in, give it a turn, and now we can fit an AeroPress or V60 in there. Obviously we're gonna have to change the grind, and that's when the two grinders really differ. On the Baratza, part of the name of the Baratza is 270, and you got 270 steps, 30 macro and 9 micro. What that means is you can move the macro across and then you can move the micro and really dial it in, and you can get back to that same position quite easily. So if you're moving from espresso to filter, you can know what number and what letter you're at and really get back to that position, and you can do it without having to grind through any coffee. So from that sense, it's a grinder that goes from espresso to filter quite easily. So if you wanted to do espresso in the morning and say filter coffee at lunch, it can be done. With the Eureka, it's a little bit different. You got your worm drive here, and that's actually moving the bottom plate of the burr. It is stepless design, so you can really dial it in. Especially for espresso, it is nice to be able to dial it in infinitely. You can really get that grind right. However, when you want to move from espresso to filter, it is a little bit hard, as you have to move this dial multiple revolutions, around 2.5 revolutions. And it's easy to go from espresso to filter because you're going coarser, you're pulling the blades apart. But then if you want to move it back to espresso and you do have coffee in the hopper, you have to grind out some coffee while you're dialing it in, because as you bring the blades together, you can jam them up. If you do, you just go a bit coarser, grind out some coffee. The other thing is, on the Baratza, because you're grinding coffee straight from the top through the blades into the portafilter, you got minimal retention. With the Eureka, there is some retention, but what's more important is the exchange. And the exchange tends to be 0.3 of a gram, so quite low. One thing I've always done with the Eureka grinders, and I am biased because I do have an Eureka grinder myself, is I normally program the single to say 1 second. And what I do is I grind out 1 second of coffee, knock it into the knocking tube. So basically I've just moved some coffee and got rid of any coffee in the channel around the blades. So the next grind, once I go back to double, is fresh coffee. So I've kind of just compensated for that exchange of coffee, so to speak. You don't have to do that with the Baratza. Now, depending on which Baratza you get, if it's a time-based or the weight-based, with the time-based, it runs the same as the Eureka in that you're grinding based on time. And if you change your grind setting, that time parameter will change. So if you grind finer, it's going to take longer to grind, and that's an easy thing to do. So just say you're grinding finer, just go up in the time and then hold that button down to set in the new time. With Eureka, the same thing, except you don't have to actually set it in. If you either single or double, and if you are in the double and you're grinding finer, you just lift up that time and it's naturally set there. So from a user interface, the Eureka is super fast to dial in, both in terms of the adjustment of the grind and the adjustment of the time. If you did want to lock that screen, just so no one touches it, you can just hit the plus and the minus button, and then now it's locked. Nothing happens except for moving from single to double, but you can't actually change the time parameters. Unlocking it again, and we're back to normal. Now, when it comes to cleaning, the Baratza is a little bit easier in that the hopper comes out and the collar here comes out just by going coarser. So you remove both and you can just put a brush through it and clean it really easily. With Eureka, it is a little bit more work to clean out. You can take out the hopper, get rid of any beans you have in the hopper, and grind out anything you've got left in there. Then you could use tablets like the grinder cleans to just clean through. You still should be using the grinder cleaner through the Baratza because it does help clean and coat the burrs. But in terms of getting in there and cleaning any retention, it's a lot easier on the Baratza. But when it comes to build, that's where you really notice the two differences. The Eureka is a really solid, well put together, beautifully designed machine. The Baratza, still beautifully designed, but it is a little bit plastic. The motor inside, once again, is a little bit plastic with plastic gears. Well, what Baratza have lacked in the build quality of, say, using plastic, they've compensated with innovation in the sense that it's the external blade that rotates. It grinds directly from the hopper straight through to the portafilter. You can go from portafilter to other brew methods really easily, so it wins in that department. So the question is, they're both at a similar price point, which is better? You got flat versus conical. I feel for espresso, I do prefer the Eureka. It's a little bit better to dial in. I like the user interface, and I do like flat blades. When it comes to wanting to use one grinder for two brew methods, although you can on the Eureka, I think the Baratza is a lot easier to go from espresso to filter and back, and also a lot easier to clean. When it comes to grinding by time, they're both equivalent. When it comes to grinding by weight, obviously the Eureka can't do that, and you get that in the Baratza. In saying that, sometimes it takes a little bit of time to tar that portafilter, and if it's in a windy environment or the bench is a bit unstable, it takes a little bit longer. In some ways, at this price point, I do prefer to grind by time because it is faster to dial in. It doesn't have any variables in the sense of it doesn't have to wait for a portafilter to calibrate, and you can always use an external scale like an Akai or a Time War to really weigh that portafilter and make sure you're getting it consistent. But in saying that, they are very consistent grinders with low retention, or in this case, low exchange of coffee. So both the Baratza and Eureka are super popular grinders. So I'm curious to know, do you have Eureka? Are you team Eureka? Do you have a Baratza? Are you team Baratza? Let me know in the comments below, which grinder of these do you have or would you pick? And like always, if this video has brought you value, hit that thumbs up. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe. Thank you and see you on the next video.